So this was a community service we were brought up in. As children, we were in a neighborhood that had a number of elderly people. People live long there. Yeah, that should be a good sign. And so we had a lot of elderly neighbors, and we would go, and Daddy would say, please go shovel Mary and Nellie's snow. We had plenty of snow to go around. And then the answer was, well, if they give us a quarter, Daddy, is it okay? Absolutely not. If they give us a cookie, maybe a cookie, but you should get out of there pretty quickly after you go. Maybe if you did it in the morning, nobody'd know who did it, kind of thing. So you were called service. The people in the church that we went to St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church, where we'd had families since 1850, all knew each other, all grew up together, and you served your neighbor. It really was truly serve your neighbor, love your neighbor, and there were a lot of feuds. I'm not telling you this is idyllic, little happy place. People got shot on certain streets, and there were all sorts of people, awful things, like the Ku Klux Klan used to leave horrible things. We were a Roman Catholic family, so my grandfather experienced that. I mean, it was a really interesting kind of background. On the other hand, we were taught from the ecology of what they grew up in. They were in the Depression, post-World War I. You worked for what you got. You worked on behalf of your neighbor, and you sort of loved life. There was a sort of this lilt. And one of the cast of characters whom I remember vaguely, who died when I was about 5, is my namesake, who was a woman by the name of Elizabeth McAnarney. Now, was quite a character that everybody knew, meaning a character. She never married. She taught kindergarten for 55 years in the Watkins School, which is the longest-serving teacher in the school still, and they write about her still. And she drove a car, even though she'd go down to Scarsdale and go on the wrong side of the road or whatever. She got there. I mean, she was a real independent lady, and there were a lot of those people in the 20s and 30s, I think. I don't think she was so terribly unusual, but everybody sort of knew her, and they knew her car, and they knew how to stay out of the way when she came twirling around. And the students for generations used to come visit our family, even after she died, and told us these great stories. And so the education was important right from the beginning. Service was important, and the fun of life. Our father, however, having returned to Watkins from Columbia, recognized small towns had the great advantages, but they could be limiting. And he felt 3 daughters in the family, and my mother felt strongly that education was extremely important to give us wings. And our father, with all due respect for those of you who come from small towns, used to say he didn't think small towns were a good place for young women. And he used to say, get your educations, and if you want to come back, it would be a great place to have a summer home, but you may not want to settle, because remember, at that time, transportation was limited, there weren't planes, and the people's lives were wonderful lives, but they were quite concrete, operational in many instances, but very functional, because things got done. So that was sort of the family ecology. Our mother's family also came from Ireland in the 1850s. Our maternal grandfather worked his way up from a bricklayer position to becoming head of construction for the Adolescent architectural firm in New York City. He oversaw the building by hand, took 10 years, the Harkness Memorial Tower at Yale, the West Point Gym, Flower and Fifth Avenue Hospital, several banks in New York City, and he died on the job at 58, having had really quite a spectacular career as a self-made person. Education was very important in his family. Our maternal family and all of my mother's family was educated. They were both men and women in that family. So that's sort of the story of the paternal ancestry, but mine was really very much based in Watkins Glen with visits to our maternal family in New York City. So we got to the Radio City Music Hall, and we come back to Watkins and say, we just spent the Saturday there, and people say, well, was that uptown? So no, it's maybe uptown New York City, because we didn't know very much about New York City, but no, it's not here. Remember, and the issue was, if it weren't here, it didn't exist. So when we went to college, people really criticized us for not going to the college down the street, which was excellent. It was called Cornell. It was for Iris with dear love. And Daddy used to say, get a little further away. It's better to be away, because he knew what it was like when you went to the city, so I wanted to get out. But anyhow, that's a long way of saying our ecology is in this wonderful, idyllic, small town, Watkins Glen, and on Seneca Lake during the summers.
Now, you have a reputation as really very good with business things. And
well, that's sort of funny, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you about what influences were in your life that led to this
It comes
skill.
primarily from, I think, from what I can tell, and this is all hypothetical now. So this is the hypothetical construct for those of you who are from our program. Theoretical construct. I think it was because of our direct influence from our father through our grandfather. They were impeccable small business people who balanced their books every night. If they had to stay until midnight to balance them, they did it. And our father, when he died hunting, doing something which he loved to do, and that at that time was a very fine pastime. His books were perfect. He was 73, and the bank came in and said they never had seen anything like it. So they were very smart business people. They understood investment banking, not at the level of the greatest science of New York, but they were smart. And I felt that my origins, as you and Carol and I were talking yesterday, my first job was shining shoes for my daddy, and I had a business at 8 years of age. And the business was, I had to buy all my own supplies, I had to go to the bank and put my 25 cents in, but I negotiated a good deal with my father. I don't know how many of you remember wingtip shoes that were brown and white. Iris does. And Mary Ann does. So I looked at these things, and Daddy said he'd pay me 5 cents each shoe, and I could get 10 cents for a pair of shoes. And I looked at these and said, those, if I get brown on white and white on brown, that's a 20 cent. No, he said 15 cents. Okay, I'll show you I can really do it. 20 cents, so we negotiated getting that. We negotiated my first bank account with Louise Clark, I'll never forget. It's a family friend, and she lovingly looked down and said, now, how much is it this week, Elizabeth? And I'd say, 15 cents. That's fine, and she'd seriously put it in the bank. That's the fabric of the small town, of the adults sort of helping the youngsters. What happened when I became chair is I truly believed if your adolescent program is broke or your department is broke, it's broken because you don't have any monies to care for your own in terms of retaining people, but also you don't have any monies for R&D. So I had an opportunity given to me by wonderful people in the community and our forebears in the Department of Pediatrics to take some money, invest it, and I just got the university to allow me to put it in high-risk efforts, and they called me the other day and said, you just made $1 million, Alyssa. I said, 6 months, that's not bad. For 10 million? So, yeah, it's sort of there, but I'm not formally trained. Our father was formally trained in business. He had been both at Columbia and Harvard, and so I was sort of an amateur learning at the knee of the master, and I sort of like it, you know? Isn't our life all about investment in the young and in the future? So it's very much very in keeping. But I wouldn't say, if you were to put me with people who are really sophisticated, I may be more crafty than I am sophisticated, you know? Sort of that street smarts. Somebody's going to take your broom, you know, you just bought this new broom after World War II and it's going to disappear off your porch. Well, you can put your 25 cents wisely, so.
One thing that we really haven't talked about is your adolescence.
My adolescence was free of a lot of external forces, if I could put it that way. When I went to my undergraduate school, which was a very sophisticated place, all-women's college, I really had my eyes open. For example, I never knew anything about individuals who are gay, about whom we know so much more today. And I found that my eyes were opened about all sorts of things. But that was what Daddy used to say. Your education will be your opportunity to live. So I grew up as a member of a pack of people in my class. We had 70 people in the class. Each of us held multiple offices. Each of us dated everybody else. And we had a wonderful time. But it was relatively, compared to today, there wasn't any television until 1952. I really didn't know what that was. We were out doing things, you know, hanging out at this soda fountain, and we used to get these little fizzy things like Carol, and we all loved that. We talk about this all the time, and our dates were relatively unsophisticated, not a lot of cars, and we went to the lake and did all sorts of things. So we were free, but not sophisticated, and were not very aware of the wonderful eclecticism in our country. So we had sort of a homogeneous group of people sitting in a valley, loving the lakes, and you know, that was, in the 50s were pretty prosperous times in the country. So I had a great adolescence. We did just what we wanted to do. Nobody was worried about you being out late at night because there weren't any predators around, and if there were, the town got rid of them. I mean, they knew who they were, and parents were actively involved, but not snooping over everything. So I really think we were able to grow and thrive, but there was supervision. And our father knew exactly what was going on. Mommy did too. She was around, but she didn't work, and she knew exactly what was going on. They were always at the school for all our activities. Everybody knew them. My mother would walk up the street 2 blocks, and she'd be in the school. Daddy'd go 2 blocks the other way, he'd be at work. So you can imagine we'd be on our bicycles around doing all jumping, into the lake, doing all sorts of things. But it wasn't the world that we have today, and I think that's some of the complexity of what we're dealing with today, and that is how to keep that sense of freedom and not impede it, but yet not allow things to happen that are adverse for our children and adolescents. So it was a very happy adolescence. When I went away to school, I realized I had an awfully good time, because at 18 I walked into a group of colleagues who had been at private schools, and I'd been at high school where we really never got through our senior year of English because we were having a good time with the teacher all the time. And all of a sudden we hadn't read a lot of the classics and all that. Well, it was okay. We had a great time, and he was happy. We were happy, and we ran the school play. And during the school play, we didn't do any serious stuff. We got up there and performed, and the whole town came out. It was rather loose education, but our father tried to deal with the yings and the yangs of remaining in the community, part of the community, versus sending us to private school, and it didn't make sense. He had grown up there. He said, it's important for you to understand your colleagues and other people, and these are contacts that will last forever. So my best friend from 2nd grade, Carol knows her, is still very active and around, and still in contact 60 years later, and she's great. So it was a happy time. But we worked hard. When we were in school, I certainly passed physics and chemistry and all that, and got a few people to help me with it. But it's good.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think of Bob's research with connectedness, and this is really the epitome of all those criteria.
Yeah, I wrote about this, actually. There's an article in HADC, and some of it was pretty bad. I don't want to paint a picture that you live in a small town. When you walk out, somebody already knows what you're not thinking and tells you what you think, or says things after they come out of church that are very hurtful. I never understood that at all. You're going to church, and then you come out say, I just saw so-and-so with so-and-so in the bar last night. Well, who cares? So there is that kind of intrusion, lack of boundaries, but you learn to love it because there's a lot of love behind a lot of this. And I can't help but be deeply impressed. I've told Carol this. When our mother was aging and in our home, she died in our home. Our father was born in that home. And a visitor came from the church, and she stood at the steps and said, Dr. McAnarney. I said, no, I'm Lissa. To you, Mrs. Desso, and she said, I waited for this day to help the McAnarney family. She was bringing communion to my mother. I said, well, please come in. I'd love to hear what you want to say. And she said, your grandfather gave our father fuel during World War II, or before World War II. And I always said we'd pay it back, and now this is 60 years later, and I'm at your door to serve your mother. And I said, come in, let's talk about this. And her feeling was, you don't take without giving, even if it's 60 years later. And I said, oh, this is really spectacular. You just made my day. After having just got beaten up in the office by faculty who wanted 10 more square feet. I said, oh, this is neat. Thank you for coming. We're going to be good friends. And every Sunday I could get down there to greet her, give her a big hug, and she said, remember, I'm just paying you back. I said, you don't pay us back. This is all love that's coming through the door. So these are very special kinds of things. But adolescence was pretty ordinary, but ordinary in